The last scream of the storm died like an old man's breath, and with it something more than weather passed from the world. Jon stood in the courtyard with Longclaw black in his fist. The blade rhymed with a thin line of frost that smoked as it met the first thin fingers of dawn. All around him the shapes of men and women and things that had been men and women lay stranded as if the snow had tried to lift them and could not. The cold that had settled in weeks before, deeper even than the memory of other winters, the kind that crept up from the stones and nested in marrow, lifted an inch. It was as if an iron hoop had been unwound from his chest, and yet he did not gasp. He was too tired for it. The cracked blue shards he had become in the moment of Michaelmas hush, the ancient thing with a crown of thorns of cold, the patient gaze like a winter sea, had spilled across the paving of Winterfell. Where they had fallen, frost melted and ran down the seams of rock like tears. Unsullied in files beside the inner wall watched with a soldier's blankness as broken weapons were dragged free and broken men were lifted, while those who had lived through the night moved as if underwater. The quiet was a kind of wealth in itself. All sound was slow, deliberate, boots on stone, a dragon's distant gust, the soft wet chuff of a horse's flank as it flinched, still expecting the next nightmare. He did not remember the strike, only the weight of the thing's nearness, a memory of other battlefields where the choice had been thrust into his hands. He remembered the feel of the sword in the bones of his fingers, the way the cold went out when the blade went in, the brittle shattering like old ice when you step through a frozen stream and see black water flow beneath, and the sound that wasn't a sound but the absence of one. Then there was a collapse, not just of bodies but of a net the sky had worn, an old fishwife's thing that had held every light hostage. And now there was the sky, pale and thin, and a faint hint of color at the edges like the blush that returns to a child's face after fever breaks. Jon breathed and saw his breath like smoke that was only his own. He rubbed Longclaw's hilt with his thumb and found the familiar grooves and the little notches that came from the first men who had held it. The wolf's head at the pommel looked up at him as if to ask whether it was done. He did not answer because nothing is ever done, even when it is done, and because he did not trust his voice. He turned when he heard Ghost. The great white dog limped toward him, muzzle wet and pink where the white gave way to scar. Ghost's eyes were the red of coals banked for the night, and he pressed his head into Jon's thigh as if to anchor him in the world that was left. Jon bent with a slow ache and put his forehead against Ghost's skull and let himself close his eyes for one breath. And in the hush of that darkness, he heard the crackle of pyres that had not yet been built. When he stood again, he saw her. She moved through the wreck as if she had been made for it. Her cloak was mashed snow and soot, singed where they had circled in the sky while whatever gods there were weighed them. Her hair had come loose. The steel in her face was a delicate thing, the way a blade can be made of something almost translucent and still take a life. Daenerys Targaryen walked with unsentimental care, stepping around a fallen Unsullied who had not watched his shield's edge and would not have a chance to make that mistake again. Drogon's shadow slanted past her like a sundial's hand, the dragon's wingtips skimming the broken crenellations as if it had learned the shape of Winterfell by memory in a single season. She looked at Jon, and in her eyes there was relief and something that was relief's neighbor. She had seen the White King break in front of him. It had unfolded the way the old stories promised and the way newer ones feared. She stopped an arm's length away and did not go closer. "It's over," she said, in a voice that scarcely belonged to anyone. "It's over. For now," he said. He wanted to offer more. Some men were better at it, at putting a hand on a shoulder and making a world with that, but even his hand ached. He looked past her at the yard, at the bodies arranged in haphazard honor, at the men from the hills, the farmers that had come with pikes they'd never meant to use, at the Dothraki stragglers with their long hair cut short by survival and their pride dressed in black smoke. He thought of the ones he could name and the ones he could only count, and the part of him that was always counting. He thought of Lyanna Mormont with her jaw clenched and the giant's weight pressing down, and he thought of the old words, the living and the dead. There was a ledger somewhere, and he did not know whose table it lay upon. Around them, orders moved like fish in a river. Grey Worm passed with the measured stride of a man who has held too much together for too long to let it fall apart now that it has reason to. His face was a study of stone. But his men looked at him, and the look in their eyes was warmer than anyone would say. Tyrion appeared like a creature from a fable, a prince come out of a fireplace, his hair matted to his face, the left sleeve of his doublet torn where he had caught it on some half-frozen blade. He caught Jon's gaze and gave a little nod that was part salute and part admission that words were not the tools required. Davos limped from somewhere with a soldier's practicality, a scrap of cloth tied over a cut that would not kill him. He was already counting wood. Jon could see it in the crook of his fingers as if he held a ledger there. Sansa stood at the entry, a single strict line in a world of broken ones, and listened to 3 men at once and then dismissed them with a lift of her hand. Her eyes passed over Jon as if he were another part of the yard she had accounted for, then returned with a softness that was not for anyone else to see. Arya was nowhere and everywhere. A small shadow that could have been a boy in the old god's time, a girl with a man's knife, a wind that made doors move when no one touched them. Bran sat, or seemed to sit, his chair tucked by the weirwood's memory of itself, his face empty as a slab of fresh snow where children had not yet put their heels. In that face you could see birds turning in air he'd never breathed, and he did not blink. "All fires," Davos said, as if to himself. "All the fires. All the fires," Jon echoed softly, meeting the older man's glance. "We'll need to do it by name." "We'll do what we can," Davos said. "And what we can't, we ask the gods to do. They'll be busy." The work tore a new kind of hole in him. Building pyres was not the same as cutting wood for winter. The weight of limbs was different. Men sagged in odd ways. Women too. He tried not to notice when the bodies had been laid so that fingers touched fingers and could have been brothers or could have been men who had never looked at one another in life. The smell of the living among the dead was always a complicated thing. With cold it was muted. With flame it would be something else. He told himself there would be comfort in it. He told himself 100 things he did not quite believe and then lifted another board. Sam found him halfway across the yard with an armful of spears he'd tied together with cord. His frightened honesty had not left him during the night. Sam had fought until his arms shook, and now he had the look of a man who was still fighting, but in a different theater, the inward one. He wanted to cry and did not, and of all sights that morning, that one nearly undid Jon. "Jon," Sam said, "I am glad." "I know," Jon said, because he could not stand to hear it. He put his hand on Sam's shoulder and let it rest there, and that sufficed. Sam nodded rapidly, his breath hitching. Then he looked down at his hands as if the knuckles, raw and rawer, could tell him something new. The leather of his gloves creaked faintly when he tightened his fingers and then let go. "We'll write them down," Jon said. "We'll write them down and we'll say them as we burn them, and there will be no man or woman gone without being named." Sam made a small sound of agreement that was also grief, and then he nodded again and swallowed and went to it. Jon watched him leave and thought of the books Sam would someday open and the ink he would spill and the lines he would draw in the dark hours. That memory felt like light you could carry in your pocket. It wasn't big enough to see by, but it was something you could put your fingers on when there were no other good things in reach. The first pyres were lit by mid-morning, if morning it could be called. The snow had become slush and then a gray water that mixed with old ash and made its own smell. The flames took in fits. They climbed in uncertain motions, then found a rhythm like breath. The sound of burning is alike and not alike to the sound of the sea. It has more questions in it. Jon stood with the first of the families and said the names he had been given and the ones he could recall without prompting. He said them as if they were vows because in a way they were. He said them as if the dead could hear and as if the living needed him to say them more than the dead needed to be called. He did not notice at first that when he spoke the men from the Stormlands looked up, and the northern men stood a touch straighter, and a Dothraki, face black with soot except for 2 clean trails where tears had carved lines, lifted his hand and laid it on his chest. He did not mean to become anything by speaking names. That was the danger, things sprout into other things without anyone intending it. But he kept speaking because the alternative was unthinkable. By the time the last pyre caught, the sky had softened to a sheet of pale, and Drogon wheeled high and slow, a feature of the firmament like a cloud that could strike. Regal came lower, one wing hitching with an injury that would not kill him. When he passed, John felt a thrum under his ribs like the remembered echo of horse hooves. He had flown once, and that memory threatened to rise and carry him elsewhere. He pushed it down. He had enough to do with his feet on the ground. In the hours that followed, there were councils and food that tasted only of itself. The kitchens did what they could with grain that had survived and smoked meat and the dry, sharp taste of herbs saved for holidays. Eating was a sort of labor too, the kind you owe to those who did not get to, and he did it though his mouth felt like someone else's and his tongue had no reason to lie to it. The first council was half accident. People found one another in a side chamber off the Great Hall because it was warm and because it had a table someone had wiped blood from. Tyrion was there because Tyrion tended to be precisely where all possible paths converged. Sansa was there because she had followed the paths first and placed a stone where she wanted them to meet. Davos because men found him whether they knew they were looking for him or not. Grey Worm because duty is a compass that is not confused by weather. Varys because his quiet is a net that catches fish no one else knows swim in waters. Arya because no door is properly shut against a determined girl who has been forced to learn what she should never have had to learn. Bran was wheeled there by a boy who seemed terrified of breathing the same air as him and yet proud to have been asked. Daenerys came late. She had been with her dead. That was what she said, and no one mistook it for theater. Jon stood at the end of the table. He had not wanted to, but everyone had left him there. The candles threw each of their faces into relief, bringing out plains and lines that looked like maps of their private countries. "We must speak of the living," Sansa said without preface, "and of what they will eat and how they will shelter and what we ask them to do next." Jon met her eyes and felt that old thing between them, a rope that had been thrown across a river and caught on both banks and now took weight. He nodded. "We'll have the stores counted by nightfall. We'll quarter those that can't return home. There are many who have no home to return to," Varys said softly. "The dead marched far. Villages that stood in the lee of old hills now sit in their own ashes." Jon looked at him. "Then some will make their homes here for a time. Some will go to White Harbor and some to the smaller keeps. If winter has not finished with us, we'll finish with it. We have done it before." Grey Worm inclined his head. "My soldiers can help. We can build, we can dig. We will need timber. Timber and time," Davos said. "And nails. And men who know how to use a hammer without splitting their thumbs." Tyrion's small smile was bloodless and amused by nothing. "Nails can be made. Men's thumbs will heal. The larger question stands where Cersei stands. She has not moved. She built her victory plan on our failure." "On your failure," Sansa said coolly. "Ours," Tyrion corrected himself quickly. "I am long past trying to distinguish the degrees of my mistakes." "We beat what no one else could beat," Arya said. "She will sit in her big chair and say it was nothing to do with her. But she knows." Daenerys placed her hands flat on the table. Her ring finger bore the imprint of a sword hilt that had pressed there in the night, a crescent of red. "I have a city to take," she said. "The city that murdered my father and called it justice. The city that laughed when my brother ran to the sea with illusions in his hair. It is yours if you will help me take it." No one corrected the pronoun. The hall had the kind of silence that comes when multiple truths are sharp enough to cut and people are deciding which finger to sacrifice to keep the hand whole. Jon felt their eyes tilt toward him like candles in a draft. "We will have to deal with her," he said carefully. He did not look at Daenerys because looking at her was a kind of taking himself by the face and turning it toward fire. "She won't stop. She'll think our dead have made her stronger. And you," Tyrion said gently, "have done something that will make her weaker." Jon did not answer. He did not know how to hold the shape of what he had done. He did not want it to be a thing he wore. He had killed a monster that was also a story, and in doing so he had agreed to make stories more powerful than they ought to be. Plenty of men had killed, and some of them had saved a great many lives, and none of that made them well suited to deciding how bread should be distributed in a city of 500,000 souls. Yet men liked that sort of logic. It let them put a weight in the balance and watch the plates move. Varys's eyes were careful. There is one other matter that can't be ducked. Your name." The word dropped like a coin on a stone floor. Sansa's eyes flicked to him with a warmer, more dangerous affection than he liked. Arya's mouth thinned. Bran watched him without seeming to be watching anyone. Daenerys did not move. "I don't," Jon began. "We will not," Sansa said, kinder than he deserved. "Pretend that no one knows. We tried that. It did not pretend well. There are whispers in every hall. Men say Aegon in corners and look toward the door to see if anyone has heard them say it." Daenerys's gaze moved to Sansa, then back to Jon. "Your father's name," she said softly. "And mine. Their names," Arya said, and Jon blinked because of who she meant by father. She put her fingers on the table as if testing the wood. "We've won something no one else could win, and now we are supposed to decide who gets to sit under a roof that makes people kneel." Tyrion poured a small ration of something brown and practical into a dented cup. He was less drunk than his kind of man generally was after such a night. "We are supposed to decide, yes, or try to, or ask a million strangers to fight for the chance to decide. Where I was born, men made their choices and then explained them afterward as if gods had whittled them out of hedge branches and passed them down with the morning's bread. It is better, if such a thing can be better, to be honest before we act." "You want a council," Davos said, watching Tyrion over the rim of a cup he hadn't raised. "A big one. The biggest," Varys murmured. "The realm is a wounded animal. It will need to be coaxed. It will need to be shown that there is a future for it that is not smoke. A great council could do that. The last one did not go so badly." "The last one," Sansa said, "ended with a boy on the throne." "Some boys," Tyrion said, "are better than some men." Jon closed his eyes for a moment and saw the weirwood's red leaves flashing against the white like blood on linen. He thought of Ned Stark, father and not father, standing on a wall beside him in memory. He thought of Lyanna Stark, who had died under a king's flag. He thought of Rhaegar, who had taken her hand in the quiet while the world yelled outside their door. Their choices had become his life. Their names lived in his body, in the shape of his face and in the way people looked at him now without meaning to. That was not his fault or his virtue. It was a fact, and one that had to be managed like weather and plague. He did not want a crown. He did not want a throne. He wanted the North to be fed and for children to sleep through the night. He wanted the idea of the Night King not to have an heir. But wanting was irrelevant. "I killed him," he said finally, and his throat scratched at the words as if his voice were a sword that needed oil. "With help, with a great deal of help. I did what I had to do. There is another thing I have to do now. Cersei is a blade that gleams when you hold it wrong. She will cut and cut until there is nothing left to cut. She will not stop because she cannot stop. We will have to go to her." Daenerys did not blink. "With me." "With you," he said, "but not as if this were only your problem or mine. It belongs to everyone who wants to see children grow old and gray. And when it is done, when she is done, we will have a reckoning. Not of revenge, of choosing." The word was odd in his mouth. He had always chosen in smaller rooms. He had chosen where to put his foot next, whom to ride beside, which road to take when both promised misery and one promised a little less. Choosing in a hall with candles and clever men was a different craft. It ranked choices like coins. It made lists. "A great council," Tyrion said, as if sealing a bargain with himself. "Send ravens to every lord who can claim a keep and to the free cities for observers, to Stonehelm, to Dorne, to the Vale, to the Riverlands if they have a lord to send, to Storm's End, to Glover if he has swallowed his pride and returned from his sulk. Tell them we will meet south, on Dragonstone perhaps, or in Old Town if the maesters can be trusted to host a thing they do not control." Sansa's mouth pressed thin and thoughtful. "Dragonstone will do. We can secure it with men we trust. Old Town is another country, and the Citadel is not as blind as it pretends." "Dragonstone," Daenerys agreed. "I will see to the preparations." "You'll fly," Jon said without thinking, and for a moment her eyes warmed and cooled at once. You will come by road, she said, with the men who will listen to you because you did what you did. In towns where my banners still mean a promise I have not kept soon enough, and in towns where your father's banners still mean bread, you will make sure we are fed and housed on our way. You will see what there is to see. He nodded. I will. Sansa, she lifted her chin. The North needs me here. It needs a head that can be seen. You will have men enough for the road. I will right the Vale and the Manderley men and see that there are barges where they're needed. The Riverlands will be stubborn but practical. Edmure is a fool in some rooms and a better man than most in others. If he is alive, he will come. If he is not, someone will volunteer to be him. Storm's End, Davos asked. Tyrion shrugged. We gave it away. We can ask for it back. The young lord there might be more reasonable than his blood would suggest. Yara, Varys said, the Ironborn like no one and nothing but the sea. They hate Cersei, Arya said. Just enough to be useful. Or more. Or less. Doesn't matter. They will want the chance to burn what cannot defend itself. On our side or not, they will come. Then we do it, Jon said, before anyone else could add a weight to the scales. We send the ravens. We build the wagons. We make the road ready and we go. Later, when the council had broken up and the hall had been given back to the shadows that lived in it whether men came or went, Daenerys came to him where he stood by a slit window watching the snow's long, slow surrender to the lessons of the season. He could feel her presence before he saw it, a warmness that did not belong to the fire in the braziers and did not ask to. You mean to carry it, she said, not asking. You mean to put it on your shoulders and pretend it weighs less because you are pretending. He swallowed. I mean to do what I can do. That's all I've ever done. Men will make you a thing, she said very lightly. Do you understand? They are already doing it. I would not mind if the thing they made you were mine. He turned and met her gaze and felt that strange current that had been set running when they had first shared a tent. There was nothing about it that he trusted. He trusted it less because it was one of so few things in his life that he wanted. Love was a narrow bridge with water on both sides and no rail, and he had never been much for bridges. I am not yours to make, he said gently, any more than you are mine. Her face flickered as if someone had passed a hand in front of a candle. We could be each other's. We could, he said, and let the words live in the air without catching them. But not now, not like this. There is a city to take. There are people to feed. There are men who will die if we decide we need to solve our feelings before we solve their hunger. She laughed then, unexpectedly, and the sound folded something in him like a letter. Solve our feelings, she murmured, amused and furious at once. Who taught you to speak like that? An old man with a blunt sword and a better heart than most kings, Jon said. And a dead girl who threw snowballs at me and told me I was slow. You have too many ghosts, she said, and then caught herself at her own word and shook her head. No, not that one. Keep that one. I mean to, he said, and Ghost, as if on cue, slid into view and leaned once more against his knee. Daenerys let her hand drift near the white fur but did not touch. Dragonfire and direwolves were two close cousins in legend for comfort. When she was gone, Jon stood a while longer and watched the yard as the last pyres burned. The light tilted toward afternoon. The day had a different shape than other days had had for months. It was not brighter. It was a different kind of dimness, the kind you get in the hour before the lamp is lit and read by. He slept that night only because his body forced him. Sleep was not gentle. He woke before dawn with his mouth tasting of ash and went to the godswood and sat under the tree with its red eyes and did his best to form a prayer out of the little that he had. He did not ask for thrones. He asked for the patience to remain decent while people argued in circles around him. He asked for the strength to listen, which is a different kind of strength than swinging a sword. He asked to be able to forgive himself when he failed at both. Bran was already there. Jon did not ask whether he had slept. Felt obscene to ask Quest. Ions of what sat in the boy. The snow around the roots was pocked with tiny holes where thaw had begun to undo the work of the storm. Bran's chair made a faint rasp as the boy turned to regard him. "You will go south," Bran said. As a child, he had once had a way of asking that made you want to tell him stories. Now his voice was the story. "You will go to the Trident. You will stand where other men stood when the world thought it was finishing its turning and didn't. The water will be high because it has been fed by melt. You will smell wet wood. There will be a woman in a blue cloak there who will tell you something you don't want to know, and you will thank her afterward for saying it." Jon looked at him for a long time because humor with Bran was like counting birds in a storm. "I meant to go south," he said. "The rest I will meet as I meet it." Bran did not nod but somehow gave the impression of having approved, or at least not disapproved. When you stand at the mouth of a cave and the wind comes out of it, sometimes it tells you whether a bear is sleeping. You do not need to go in to know that much, but you will eventually. "Is the bear Cersei?" Jon asked because he could not help himself. Bran's mouth almost moved. "Bears don't wear crowns. Some do in stories." "This isn't a story," Bran said. "Not for you. Not right now." Jon let the silence sit between them and looked up through the red leaves to the paler sky. He could hear men moving beyond the godswood, the clank of chain, the dull rhythm of work resuming in a place that has decided to last. He stood eventually and put his hand on Bran's shoulder and said nothing into the shape of the boy's thin bone beneath his shirt. It was the only blessing that would not sound like ignorance. 2 days later, the ravens went out. Not all at once. They had to feed them, and some of them had to be coaxed, and one had to be replaced because it had decided to live forever in a loft in the stables and would not be moved. Sansa had written letters that were sharper than any blade Jon had ever owned. She had not lied in them. She had arranged truths as if they were stones in a wall and left holes where a reader would want to put his foot. Men like to step into their own traps if you left the right sort of space for them. The letters spoke of the Night King dead under Winterfell skies, of the army of the dead shattered, of the cost paid openly and in full. They spoke of Cersei's failure to lift a hand, of her drinking in high windows while the rest of the world bled. They spoke of a council on Dragonstone to decide the fate of a realm that no longer had to whisper against the wind. Jon's letter had fewer words. He put his name to it because there was no avoiding it, and because not doing so would be a lie of cowardice. He said he would come south not as a conqueror but as a marshal of the road. He said that those who came to Dragonstone would have bread and salt and be safe in their comings and goings. He said he meant to see Cersei brought to a kind of justice that would not forward the wheel she loved to spin. He did not say what crown he would accept if one were thrust at him because he did not know, and the words would not be made honest by wishing. He left Winterfell a week after the ravens, with a column that grew as it moved. Davos rode at his side because they did best when one of them could say yes while the other said no. Tyrion came because he could not help it and because he knew the way men would twist on the road and because he was, despite himself, a man in love with the feeling of making large arrangements work. Grey Worm sent a contingent who had survived and who told their dead's names under their breath and could make a bridge out of a wagon in the time it takes a housewife to set bread. The northern men came because they were stubborn. A few Dothraki came because they wanted to see if there were horses in the south that could outrun the songs they had heard. Sam came because he had a book in his mind he did not yet know how to write, and because he refused to let Jon's heart be the only book anyone read on the way. They went slowly. Jon meant it, this business of seeing. He meant to remember that the realm was made of more than castles and choices made in marble rooms. He meant to stop at every village that had a wall still standing and a well that had not been blessed by the dead. He meant to see what the dead had done and where the living would fit around it. He wore no crown on the road and he allowed no banners but the ones that marked his column for what it was. A moving promise, a traveling hearth. In fields where frost had flattened the last of the old grain, they stopped and he got off his horse and waited with his boots growing heavy until they found a house where there were rugs on the floor and 2 children and a woman with a face like old oak. He gave them salt and meat and asked what they had and she said hope, and looked down as if she had said something impolite. He saw in her eyes that she had not had to say it many times in her life, that it did not come easily, and he tied his own hope to it like a man ties his horse to another's post, so that if one breaks the other might hold. At Moat Cailin, the marsh wind tasted of secrets. The Neck had endured the long night by being too wet and too ready to swallow what came. The Crannogmen had given them passage over a causeway that was as old as any story and twice as true. Jon watched gray water twitch and close over the marks of their wheels and wondered how many armies had thought themselves safe here and learned otherwise. In a tent pitched just inside the southern gate, he met Meera Reed, who had the look of a reed herself, supple and strong in a way that reveals itself only when the river is angry. She ate their food with a hunger that wasn't about appetite. "Your father would have thought this wise," she told him with a fierce satisfaction. That was half grief, going slow, seeing. "He would have told you not to trust the land that looks most like a painting." "I didn't know him well enough to know what he'd have told me," Jon said. "You know now," she said. "Or you will." Her eyes in the lamplight were the color of river mud. When she rose to go back to her own people, she put her hand over his for a breath, then took it away and gave him a look that was regal in a way kings never manage. "Keep your promises," she said, and he told her he would and meant it. South of the Neck, the road found a different step. The land rose and fell in little hills that held sun like cupped hands, and woods stood in clumps that looked as if someone had placed them for shade. They passed men with odd local hats and women with belts like little chains, each link made by a grandfather who had only one silver piece to melt at a time. Children ran alongside their wagons and pointed at Ghost and at the big men from the Stormlands and at Grey Worm's soldiers whose discipline frightened them in a way that became admiration before they had finished their second look. At noon on the 5th day, a group of farmers came out with carts of turnips and a boy who had painted a dragon on his cheek in ash. He had done it with his left hand and it looked like a terrible fish, but the pride in it was a kind of coin that paid for things money cannot. Jon got down and asked him his name, and when the boy said it, Jon said it back and promised to try the turnips and did. They were woody and wonderful, and he said so, and people laughed in a way that made the odd little hill they stood on feel as if it had grown taller to make room for their joy. Tyrion rode half the day with his head turned toward the fields, his mind making figures in the margins of a book only he could see. "Village by village," he said quietly, almost to himself. "This is how you do it if you want the realm to be a thing and not a word. It is too slow for the impatient." "I'm not impatient," Jon said. "I don't know how to be anything else." Tyrion gave him a sideways look that was almost fond. "You do. You learned. We all did in this last season. The Night King taught us patience by forcing us to stand and wait while he walked." At a fork in the road beyond the green fork of the Trident, they met a small column of men wearing ravens on their sleeves and the weary dignity of men who have not been beaten out of believing in orders. Lord Edmure Tully rode at their head with a look of solemn surprise on his face, as if he could not quite believe that he had succeeded in being alive to ride. He was more grays than reds now, and his eyes had the soft ache of a man who knows that he has not been as useful as his father, but he had come. "I am lord of something," he said apologetically as he dismounted. "And I thought that might mean I could be of use for something. I brought men. I brought carpenters and one man who says he knows how to make bridges in a hurry, and I don't disbelieve him because he talks the way my father did when he meant to do a thing." "You are welcome," Jon said, and meant it. "We have bridges to make." Edmure nodded with a grateful melancholy. He had always needed to be told he had done the right thing, like a boy who worries all day about whether he has put his toys back and then wants someone to come look. Jon did not think less of him for it. There are some kinds of men you need less because of their cleverness than because they remind other men that decency is not theatrical. At the Trident, the water ran high the way Bran had said it would. He stood on the bank and watched it with the attentiveness of a man who does not trust rivers and with the hunger of a man who wants to know how they think. He could see the place where a dragon had once died and where a prince had fallen from a horse whose name no one wrote down in any book. Men had died here for songs. He did not mean to repeat that particular liturgy. The woman in the blue cloak came out of a copse of trees with the quiet gait of someone who had learned to step around twigs. She was older than Jon at first thought and younger than his second guess. She had a scar that began under her ear and disappeared into the cloak's collar as if the robe had healed her. She had the unimportant sort of face that you forget until you need it and then remember with gratitude. She stopped at a polite distance and lowered her hood. "My name is Jane Heddle," she said. "My father kept an inn at the crossroads. It burned." She parted the cloak and produced a roll of parchment tied with blue silk, that careful particular blue you find only where a woman has saved one good thing for a long time. "This came from King's Landing. The man who brought it had his thumb broken for the trouble and did not complain. He knew who you were without knowing who you were and told me to get this into your hands. He took it." The parchment felt more serious than its weight warranted. The seal had been broken and then resealed and broken again. On the outside someone had written nothing. He tucked it into his belt without opening it. Jane watched this with approval. "You will want to read it where there are men you trust to hold your arms if you have to stand," she said simply. "It asks a thing in a way that is happy to suggest it's not asking at all. Those are the worst kinds of letters." He nodded. "Will you eat with us?" She shook her head. "No. I will go back and tell my people that your men are not like the last men who came through. And when you are done here, you will send someone to help us raise the roof we promised ourselves when the snows broke." "I will," he said. The promise felt like a peg hammered into time. He would tie other promises to it. When she was gone, he finally broke the seal and read the letter while Davos stood close enough that their shoulders could have touched if they were different men. The letter was short and full. L of a woman's calm fury. To the usurper in wolf's clothing. The quill scratched its own powers into those words. The rest of it was a cord of knives. Told him to turn back. It told him to bend his knee to the true queen who had never fled from a single battle because she had had the wisdom to choose her battles instead. It told him that if he came south he would find more than swords waiting, that he would find a city that preferred the law it understood, that he would find men who liked to eat and sleep and were not eager to burn for a northern boy's story. "She's afraid," Davos said, when he had read it and Jon handed it to him and he had read it again. "Or she's made the decision to sound as if she is not, which is a kind of fear in a dress." Jon folded the letter and put it back with an odd gentleness, as if harsh handling could change anything about what it meant. "We keep going," he said. It was not courage. It was the physics of a thing already in flight. At night in the tents beyond the river, Jon was surprised by time. It moved differently in a moving camp. He had thought the days would be marked by the steady labor that makes men's backs ache. And they were, but there was space in them too. Men told stories around their small fires and found in them a warmth that was not in the soup. Sam wrote in a hand that grew neater as the quill and will adjust it to the movement of a horse and the bump of a wagon. Tyrion hummed when he thought his mind was empty and Davos threw him glances as if the tune might be bribed to go away. Arya came and went like someone painting with water on a warm stone and returned seated with bits of information that made his life both easier and harder. Once she came back with a small loaf she swore she had bought with a coin when in fact she had bought it with a look and a word and a smile you could not hold with your fingers because it would slip out. Letters came up behind them and caught them like waves. From White Harbor, from Deepwood Motte, from Pike, where Yara's hand was as hard as a sail's rope. From Dorne, where the new prince wrote with the dangerous serenity of men who know the sun makes men lethargic and then use it against them. A boy from Old Town arrived with a letter sealed with the Citadel's cool ring and said that a maester's neutrality is a fiction that has been useful until now, and that they would come with eyes open and pens sharpened. From the Eyrie came a hand that had grown from a child's and had not yet learned to hide its excitement, and Sansa read it and smiled in a way that made Jon want to have been kinder to boys when he was one of them. They reached Dragonstone in 3 weeks that felt both long and thin. The wind off the sea made cords of salt on every surface it could touch. The island rose from the water like a memory of dragons. Its cliffs were dark and textured with ages, its castle a beast asleep on a rock. Jon had flown here once, and then it had seemed an idea. He came now by causeway and felt at once its antiquity and its stubbornness. It was a place that wanted to outlast men's reasons for building it. The yard was cleared and clean, and a set of new banners hung with the crispness of cloth not yet acquainted with weather. He felt Daenerys here before he saw her. Something about the air, about the way men stood with their shoulders set as if their posture might be read from a window. He went to the Great Hall with Davos and Tyrion and Sam and a few of the captains who came out of respect for the doors. The painted table in the hall was another kind of map. The last time John had looked at it, he had traced the long blue line of the wall and felt its cold through the paint as if that were possible. He put his hand flat on it now and felt only the table. It was as if a ghost had finally decided to yield a little space to the living. Daenerys entered like an answer to a question he had been postponing. Her face was composed, her hair like chains and threads, her dress black as a judgment. Grey Worm took up his place behind her with his men, and Missandei, whose gaze could hold both tenderness and command, stood at her right. Tyrion went to her left. Jon felt, unexpectedly, a sort of relief. In rooms like this, roles are a gift, at least for the first few minutes. "Welcome to my house," Daenerys said, in a voice that was both too small for the room and exactly right. "Which is ours until it is not any longer. We will host the council here in 7 days. The letters have been read. The ravens have returned. They are coming." "Cersei?" Jon asked. "She has not answered," said Tyrion, "which is different from refusing, in the way that threats are different from promises." "She will answer," Varys said from the shadows, and men did not jump because they expected him to be a shadow. "She will answer by not moving an inch. She will send men to our shores to count and count. She will send ships to our sea to count and count. She will prepare, and when she is done preparing, she will prepare some more. She will make a plan that is improved by its stubbornness and weakened by nothing we can see until we see it," Missandei added quietly. "That is what men like that do." Jon stood at the table and looked at the carved forests and rivers and hills. He saw places now where before he had seen colors. He saw how short a distance a rider could go in a day and still be fit to stand guard at night. He saw the way the grain moved from here to there and where the bottlenecks were and how to break them with a small hammer of men. He saw the realm not as a prize but as a series of tasks, and it made him feel less frightened and more exhausted. "We'll take care of the practical first," he said, his voice rough with salt and something else. "We need warehouses open to the men who'll come. We need stables prepared. We need fresh water that doesn't taste like dragons. We need a place where men can speak as if they are not being listened to by 100 ears, and also a place where they can be listened to by 100 ears. We need bread that can be broken and meat that can be shared, and fires kept small and watchful." Daenerys' smile was so slight it was almost a shift in light. "You are learning the language of rulers," she said, "and you are using it to talk about pots and bread. That is better than most men manage." "I am learning to listen to people who know how to cook," he answered, and heard Davos's murmur that could have been laughter, and found he could breathe more easily for just a moment. He spent the days as he had spent the roads, seeing. He went down to the low town and let it be known where he would walk and when, and then walk there and when. He met a fisherman with one hand who had lost the other to a rope that had argued with a wave. He met a woman who had come from Volantis as a girl and was now 60 and had the fierce quiet of someone who has survived 3 husbands and could still outlast any boy who wanted to run up a hill for a wager. He met children who had never seen snow and wanted him to describe it in words that would fit in their small heads. He told them snow feels like feathers and garden ash and something you have forgotten the name for, and they nodded solemnly as if they knew what he meant, which perhaps they did. Children know what words forget. At night he went back to the hall and sat with Sansa's letters and with Davos and with Tyrion and with Varys and with Grey Worm and went over lists that grew when you trimmed them as if new items were mice ready to dart into the spaces left behind. He wondered if anyone in history had ever felt caught up, and decided that if any man had, that man had been a fool. He slept when he could. Once, when he woke in an hour that had no name, he went alone to the beach. The waves made laws and unmade them in the same breath. He found a black stone that fit his hand and skipped it 4 times on water that had forgotten to be angry. He fell asleep on the sand with Ghost at his back and woke with the taste of salt on his tongue and the certainty that the city across the water was listening for them. On the 5th day, the first of the lords arrived. They came like weather. The Vale sent banners like slices of sky and men who had been carved into reliability by hard teachers. The Manderley ships came in like fat old cats, and the men leaped from them with a speed that contradicted their build. Storm's End sent a sleek column of riders with polished gear who looked as if they had been taught by the same man. Because they had. Dorne came with tents that made the yard look like a painting and men in linen who moved as if the heat had not left their bones when they headed north. From the Reach, a band of men who had once worn Tyrell pins and now wore nothing but their shame and their new hope. They came with women who had money sewn into their hems and opinions sewn into their eyebrows, and they looked at Daenerys with the complicated respect human beings reserve for beauty that might burn them. There were no Lannisters. There were a few men from the west, plain farmers and harder stone men who had lost minds and wives both, but no one with the lion on his breast. That absence sat at the edge of every conversation like a chair left open at a family table. The halls filled with the energy people bring to an event they cannot name in advance. Men who had never met clasped arms as if they had gone to school together and had fought beside one another for years, because in a sense they had. The rumors of the battle in the snow had already become stories that had already become myths. Jon walked through it and felt the energy strike sparks off his shoulders like something you could do without tinder. On the morning of the 7th day, Daenerys sent for him. She waited in a small room that looked out toward the sea, the window like a mouth-eating sky. She stood pale and straight in a dress the color of a bruise. When he entered, she turned, and for an instant he saw something almost shy move through her face and then leave it. She held a narrow circlet in her hands. It was not a crown exactly, more of a thought about a crown, a suggestion made in metal that had stopped before it became something heavy. "I had this made because people need symbols the way birds need branches," she said, with a wryness that did not vanish even when she swallowed. "I do not ask you to wear it. I ask you to help me make sure no man who comes here thinks this is their only kind of branch." He looked at it, at the way the light made its shadows seem more complicated than they were. "I don't want it." "I know," she said. "I did." They stood there for a breath that lasted days. The sea took a long drink and sighed. "If I say I want to take the throne," Jon said, forcing himself to say it plain because he had promised himself he would, "it will not be because I want to sit there. It will be because I cannot think of another way to make the men who are waiting be better than the men who have been, and because I do not trust anyone else not to waste this chance by making themselves the point of it." "We are all always making ourselves the point of it," Daenerys said, and the honest pain in her voice rang like a clean bell. "That is the problem and the reason we get out of bed. You are wrong if you think you are immune. You are right if you think you might resist it a little longer than most." He smiled, not because it was amusing but because it seemed the only way to stop himself from putting his head against the cold stone of the wall. "You will not like what this means. I am a dragon," she said, and the words were pride and a prayer and a warning and a poem. "I have grown up on what I did not like. Help me do this. Help me make something that will not burn the day it is born." He nodded. It was as much of an oath as he could make and as much of an oath as she will have wanted him to make in that moment. She put the circlet down on the table and left it there like a thing that might be useful for a moment and then hung on a peg forever after, a trophy of something done. When she was gone, he stayed, as he had stayed in so many rooms after so many people had left them, and he looked down at his hands. They were the hands of a man who had held a sword and a rope and a child and a letter that told him things he did not want to know. They were a record. He put them flat on the windowsill where the stone had been smoothed by generations of men who had stood and watched, and he thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that all a ruler could do at the end was choose what kind of story he wanted the people who came after to tell when they touched that stone. He wanted the story to say he tried. He wanted it to say he was not entirely consumed by his own needs. If he failed, he wanted the failure to be instructive and not just loud. On the horizon, as the light stretched itself into something like day, sails rounded the far carved edge of Dragonstone like cards being turned in a patient game. The first of King's Landing's ships, come to count, as Varys had predicted. They were not many, at least not yet. They were more than none. He watched them through the salt-dusted glass until his eyes stung, and then turned and walked back toward the great hall where voices were already assembling and where he would stand and make the first of a long, long chain of choices. In the hall, the world breathed in and held its breath. Lords and men who called themselves lords, and men who did not but should have, and women who had power and those who had only anger all turned toward him. He could feel their attention on his skin like the way air feels before lightning. Tyrion stood near the table, his hand resting on its carved shores the way men rest their hands on a horse before they mount. Daenerys stood at its head with a measured fire that made the banners tremble as if the wind had thought of going through them and then considered the cost. Jon took his place where the path had made it for him. He did not lay claim. He did not refuse claim. He did what men in these moments have always done and always had to do. He looked at the realm as if it were made of people whose names he knew, and he spoke as if the words were bread. He spoke of the night that had been broken and of the day that had not yet been made. He spoke of Cersei not as a queen to be toppled, but as a habit to be broken. He spoke of a throne as a chair empty before it is filled and empty afterward, and of the work that is done by other men while the chair is occupied. He told them the council would choose the future and that his name would be one of the names considered, and he told them that the choice mattered less than what they decided to make the choice mean. He did not know if he believed every syllable as he said it. He was too tired and too aware of the 100 eyes that would measure the stutter in a man's breath and build a scaffolding for a rebellion out of it. But when he saw the way a man from a village north of the Green Fork straightened his back, and when he saw a woman from the Reach's quiet smile that suggested she had known all along that bread and words were neighbors, he thought it might be enough, for the morning, for the day, for what came next. And then, as conversations braided and unbraided themselves around him, as Tyrion began the necessary small violences of turning a crowd into a council, and Varys already somehow slipped out to listen to the timbers creak and find which creek belonged to which rumor, as Davos found the man with the bridge and set him to work, and Grey Worm went among his men saying things in a language that made them straighten as if the sun had touched them, as Arya vanished and reappeared and Sansa's newest letter arrived with a ribbon that had once been purple and was now almost gray from handling, Jon felt the next choice gather itself in him like a hawk folding its wings for the dive. He found Ghost with his head on his paws near the doorway, the great dog's ears flicking at sounds only he cared to note. "Come," he said softly, and they went out together into a salt wind that had never cared for men's plans. He followed the steps he had not chosen to the edge of the wall that looked like a cliff. Far below, the sea pushed against Dragonstone as it had pushed against it before there were dragons and before there were men to name dragons. The ships from the city came closer, and beyond them, beyond that band of silvered water, the city itself gathered its red and gold like a woman collecting her shawls against weather she would not admit existed. He stood there, with Ghost pressed into his leg, with the new world in his lungs and the old one in his bones, and knew that when he stepped away from this parapet, men would call him king, or they would call him traitor, or they would call him fool. He would be all three to different mouths. He would claim a throne, or he would make a throne something worth claiming, which was a greater and subtler labor. The Night King had been straightforward. A sword into a heart, a shattering, a relief. What came now was made of meals eaten and not eaten, of words spoken and not spoken, and of the difference between mercy and softness, justice and vengeance. He had killed a myth and become one. He was resolved to be a better myth than the last. He took breath enough for the next hour and turned back toward the hall, where the council would begin to teach itself what it was, and where he could not afford to sit like a stone and pretend to be strong. The narrow stair grated under his boots. The voices thickened and separated as he entered. He met Daenerys's eyes as he took his place, and in that look there were 100 things that had not yet been decided and a few that had. Their fates were braided now, not by prophecy nor by anyone's ambition, but by the practical complication of having to occupy the same room without extinguishing one another. "Let us begin," Tyrion said, and the room held still like a beast that knows it is being saddled. Jon steadied himself with the little stolen quiet that comes when you look at men who are looking at you, and then he began to do the slow work that would one day be called claiming.